Rare Gem Productions proudly presents Entrepreneurially Thinking. Entrepreneurially Thinking is a presentation of BioSTL and CET, the Center for Emerging Technologies, changing the way you view new ventures and activating your entrepreneurial mindset, empowering you to create new pathways for business success in the St. Louis marketplace and beyond. Here's your hosts, Cheryl and Christy. Now let's get thinking entrepreneurially.
Welcome back to the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. I'm Christy Maxfield.
And I'm Dr. Cheryl Watkins-Moore. I lead the BioSTL STEM Inclusion Initiative here for the region. Hey, Christy girl.
How are you, dear?
Oh, we are back.
We are back.
Bustling.
We are. We actually, a few weeks ago, when our interview with Ronki Felite aired, and we just got an amazing shout out from her about how much she wanted to brag on us and on her episode. So I'm coming off of that high this morning. How about you?
And did you see her email where she was going to offer something to our listeners?
She is. So we want everybody to make sure that they have checked out our website for the promotion code.
Yes.
Because it's worth re-listening or resubscribing or
go.
subscribing for the first time, whatever the case may be, so that you can get that. So, but I bring Ronki up because she is a great example of doing what we always ask our listeners to do, which is help us spread the word.
Absolutely.
Because we can't have an impact if folks aren't listening to us, and folks can't find us if you don't share your favorite podcasts and all of our favorite guests and episodes. So please make sure that you share that out. Use the hashtag ETHINKSTL, ETHINKPodcast, stay listening, help us spread the word, and help us spread the word about our founding sponsors, CET and BioSTL. Help us thank them for their continued support and find out all the great programming they're doing by visiting our website and by visiting theirs, so that we can all stay in touch.
Just spread the word, guys. We need you out there while you're jogging or washing dishes or whatever you do. Listen to us and tell your friends about us.
Awesome. So we've got another great show lined up. What are we doing today?
Well, one of the skills we encourage entrepreneurs to develop is what? Empathy, right?
Always.
The ability to put yourself in someone else's reality, to look at the world from their perspective. I think a lot of people, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, needs to do that.
Absolutely.
The best storytellers helps others share their worldview and invite audiences to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Lindy Drew and her team of contributors are master storytellers.
Indeed.
So together, they are the creative energy behind Humans of St. Louis, a nonprofit that features the first-person stories and photographic portraits of St. Louisans. That's amazing. We need more people telling our story and what's going on here in the region, and they do a fantastic job at doing that. When we come back, we will speak with Lindy and one of her talented contributors, Elaine Cha, about what it means to humanize the lives of our neighbors and how this work promotes civic engagement and productive conversations.
Yes.
I think we need to have a lot of those, especially in light of what's going on here in our country, that have the potential to transform our communities. So stay listening.
BioSTL is a proud founding sponsor of the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. We want you to know about all the great things they are up to, including the BioSTL STEM Entrepreneur Inclusion Initiative, which strengthens the region's bioscience ecosystem by identifying high-potential, talented women and minority STEM entrepreneurs and providing a systematic pathway for them to create viable, high-growth ventures. You can learn more about all of BioSTL's programs by visiting biostl.org. And for your renewed and continuing support, BioSTL, we say thank you.
My name is Lindy Drew. I'm the co-founder and lead storyteller for Humans of St. Louis. And entrepreneurial thinking means to me that you're able to do what you love and make an impact while still being able to afford to have the life that you want in this creative realm.
As Cheryl said, we are joined today by Lindy Drew, co-founder of Humans of St. Louis, and Elaine Cha, founding storyteller and journalist for Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri.
Yay!
Now, Lindy in particular, Elaine, you'll have to fill us in on your background, but Lindy, you've combined social work, public health, and photography to really make Humans of St. Louis to come alive.
That's great.
So starting with you and then leading us into Elaine's backstory, because our listeners, we always give them a little flavor for who's in the room and how they came to be where they are today. How do you take social work and public health and photography and come up with this wonderful, amazing catalog of human beings from St. Louis.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
And my partner and my team here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't expect this to happen when I got to St. Louis for school to study social work and public health. But before I came here, I went to photography school for a year in New York.
Are you a New Yorker?
I am not.
So backstory is always good. Let's start there. Where are you from?
So I'm from Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh, West. Yes.
And after I was there for a while working with kids who crossed the border illegally, I ended up applying to grad school to study this issue a little bit deeper, which is now currently in the news.
Yes.
And it's been going on for years, even before I was born. But I wanted to dive deeper into social work to see what I could do beyond working in this group home for kids who would show up with just a backpack and, a phone number of their parents scribbled in their, like in the leather inside of their belt to call them as soon as they got here. Part of our work was when the social worker at this group home said it's okay to reunite the children with their mom or dad who lived here, and they'd fly them to different cities. I get to meet these parents, and we'd say goodbye to these children we'd spent weeks with. And then that was it. A bed would open up and a new child would arrive.
Right.
But there's bigger underlying issues as to why people are crossing, especially minors. And so I needed to go deeper into social work, and I needed an education for that. I ended up coming to school here and did a dual degree program at WashU. But
after a sidebar in New York.
Yeah. So
I was going to ask that. So you did photography first, right?
Yeah. So before that, I was living in New York around 2000, 2005, and I did a 1-year program of photography.
So you chose to go to New York to do this program? Or how did you find it? There's a story there. How did you find your way to New York?
I know. A certain someone special.
As always. Yes.
That's how most of us got to St. Louis, girl. If it wasn't education, it was a significant other human being. So
yeah, you
took a slight detour for a human.
Exactly.
Into New York.
So I was backpacking around Europe for 6 months.
Wow.
And I had met this person previously, family friend. Ended up making it to New York, and he encouraged me to apply for photography school.
Cool.
I did. I did not get in. I got waitlisted. And a week before photography school started, they called me and they said, someone can't make it and we'd like to offer you a slot. And I jumped on it. And so within a week, I found a camera and a new computer and started photography school. And I had this amazing teacher there who had said, if you want to make pictures, think about doing it somewhere besides New York when you're done with school, because it's so expensive to live here.
Yeah.
Make the portfolio of your dreams, come back and show one time. And I thought, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And one place I always wanted to go, probably I was 27 at the time,
was St. Louis.
Was South America.
The other S.
Imagine. That's hilarious. Not even knowing St. Louis would be where I'd end up at one time.
If I could have captured the expression of, oh, contraire, mon frère.
She just overshot the city.
Like, let me just bring you back. So South America.
So I took off to go live in Chile for like a year and a half. And I ended up working with kids who were abandoned by their parents and took care of them. In exchange, they taught me Chilean Spanish.
Wow.
And after becoming a little bit more bilingual, I decided I still wanted to make this portfolio of my dreams and photograph down there. And I'd sell the prints to editors in the U.S. to stay down there a little longer. And I ended up backpacking from Santiago up to like Costa Rica and worked as a photojournalist for a bit, getting paid very meager just to be able to learn more about street photography and news photography.
That's impactful because you're showing those stories.
Yeah.
But more impactful.
And honing your craft.
Yes.
Did you call it your craft at that point?
Not at that point. I wasn't quite sure what kind of photographer I was or wanted to be, but I know I loved taking portraiture, and I knew that I loved interacting with others and sharing their deeper stories in this documentary fashion.
That
from
is
like
very cool.
Working with them and living with them and watching these children grow, for example. So from there I ended up coming back home to Phoenix and I worked with these kids who crossed the border, and they were from all the countries I didn't make it to, like Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. And so I felt like I had this well-rounded education about Central and South America at that point from a very interesting perspective. But I still needed a little bit more
structure and
exactly.
So the degree at WashU became the way to do that.
Yeah. And so about 5 other women who were volunteering in Chile at the time, when they finished their stint there, they came to WashU for school.
Wow. So that's how you got here.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I never heard of the school before I became friends with them. So when one of them in particular would have to come to school, we would road trip from Arizona to St. Louis together. So we'd take 2 days, 3 days and drive straight through, maybe pick up another girlfriend of hers who was in the program. And then every time my friend came home to Arizona for Christmas or whatnot, she'd tell me all about her classes, what she was learning, her professors, and she does international social work as well. And it was super interesting. So at one point, she ended up going to Panama for an internship, and I went to visit her, and I wrote my application there.
There you go.
And within a couple minutes, we just hit the send button, and I ended up coming to school here.
Wow.
So then, Elaine, I have done a lot of work in nonprofits, and I've never worked anywhere where there was a founding storyteller and journalist at an organization. So how did you land that gig?
Right.
There's a lot of backstory.
Please feel free to fill us in, because clearly we care.
I'll probably learn a lot about you too right now.
Yeah, so I too am not from St. Louis originally.
None of us here are.
So we're all transplants.
All transplants.
Yes.
I moved here from Los Angeles, although that's not where I grew up, but that's where I came from to join my spouse.
So where did you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Canada.
Okay.
And then my family moved to Southern California when I was in high school. But I've lived in a bunch of places. I went to an S, not South America. I went to Seoul, Korea.
Okay, awesome.
And a number of different things happened. And before I came to St. Louis, I worked in public media, specifically with Southern California Public Radio, which is like the second. It's the largest NPR affiliate in LA.
I was with WNET in New York for a number of years before moving here.
Oh,
so
okay.
we've got some public
Yes,
television,
we do.
radio, DNA in the room.
Yeah. So
And I was in none of that.
None of that.
So this is so interesting.
That's okay. So all of us need to come together to make
this is
good
really
stuff
interesting.
happen.
Yeah.
So when I moved here, I was coming with that background, did not have a job. And I ended up getting introduced to Lindy through a mutual friend. And I did work with the Ferguson Commission doing the engagement content. So it was storytelling. That's how Lindy and I met. So we started working together then. We both then worked with Forward Through Ferguson. I had part-time work with the 9 Network, so I did some engagement work over there. And there was a job opening at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and it was for this storytelling position. I agitated. I didn't have to do it too much, but I did
They already had a
agitate
storytelling position.
for the journalist part of it.
That's awesome.
And we're the only affiliate in the U.S., and there are like 270 some affiliates. We're the only one to have someone like me working full time.
And your job is to tell the stories of the people impacted by Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri?
That's one way to put it, yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, and it's kind of hard to explain because as the founding storyteller, the job was not created for me, but I was the first one to come into it. And our CEO and president, Becky Hatter, she was one of the commissioners on the Ferguson Commission. So she was introduced to the power of storytelling, perhaps through that and just through all of the other influences that she has.
I love the powerfulness of using storytelling instead of marketing, because marketing is, what people do. It's a topic, but when you get down to storytelling, I think that's so much more personal. Telling people's stories, getting people really engaged. And the thing what you guys do is having them understand empathy for other individuals. That to me is very, very powerful. That's really cool. And I've never heard, you're the first organization that I've heard of that hired a role called storyteller. That's very cool.
Yeah. So I think, as far as what I'm doing, I'm telling the stories and that I'm collecting content and talking with people. But I think the thing that I've seen Lindy do so well and that I think, really enjoyed doing together is listening for people's stories. So more than telling the stories, we're kind of midwifing them and providing space and ways for people to tell their stories as they occur to them. We're not trying to extract a story
narrative that you
exactly
want.
Right.
Very cool.
And as a journalist, then you're also putting it in context of a larger sphere, which is also some of what you're doing in Humans of St. Louis, right? Because you're using that organic story, the story you listened for, and then placing it within context, whether it's the Ferguson Commission or the circumstances by which a Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri needs to exist and to serve, because these stories don't happen in a vacuum.
Yes, I need to interview you.
And technically, we already have.
And I was like,
actually, we have interviewed
we
you.
spent quality. So, as a lot of our listeners might know, that I'm on the board of Forward Through Ferguson, and Lindy's work, one of the ways they introduced us to the world was through Lindy's
that is
work.
very cool.
Being interviewed. I think I might be a better interview now, though. Because I have a lot less self-conscious
Is it like
editing.
our first
I assumed
recording?
there was right answers. So even though they were listening for stories, I wasn't listening for stories.
You've had a lot of practice now.
I have. Can we redo that? I'd love to redo that.
There's times I always run into people I've already interviewed on the street, and sometimes they look different. They're dressed different. They have a totally different vibe, and I approach them, and they're like,
We've
I've
already
met
had
you
this
before.
conversation before.
Remember me? I'm like,
But maybe we could have a different version of that conversation.
I've had that experience too. So that's really cool.
So Elaine, thank you. You kind of you gave us this great arc to like how your previous radio experience and storytelling experience has sort of manifested in your current role and how you've gotten connected to Lindy. I do feel like, Lindy, I skipped a little, like, okay, you did the whole backpacking through Europe, backpacking through South America, studying photography in New York, going back home, getting here to school. Still, how one goes from getting a degree in social work and public health and a portfolio as a photographer smashed together become Humans of St. Louis.
You're right.
I think I need a little bit more backstory. At least if I was listening to this, I would need a little bit more backstory.
That was where I was going. I was like, how did Humans of St. Louis get started then from all of that?
It's a good point. It's a good point. So after I ended up coming to school here, it was really hard to write papers and do research about this particular community I was interested in, which was Latin American undocumented, unaccompanied youth. So I would do my classes, and I knew that I needed a project while I was in school to still photograph because I was kind of separated from my camera. And I could never photograph those kids because of confidentiality issues and whatnot. So a mutual friend of my partner who I started Humans of St. Louis with put us in touch because my friend Carolyn Fish was looking for a way to do Humans of St. Louis, but Humans of New York, but the St. Louis style. She had been on the metro here on the way to school, walking to classes, having her experiences in St. Louis already for a couple years before me. And she'd have these rich conversations with strangers. And she thought there's got to be a way to share that. And so she had been living in New York before she came to school here. She'd followed HONY, Humans of New York. And so she reached out to me because I wanted to do photography. Originally, I was just taking pictures.
Wow.
We went out together on the street, and I really followed her style for what she was thinking for this idea. And she was very intentional with her questions. They were very open-ended. She was super empathetic. She'd just listen and gather information and morsels and bits and put it together. She would end up writing the stories from memory. I use a recorder now, but she has an incredible memory.
Wow.
And we'd talk about how it was coming together before we published anything. We'd hit the streets. And so
you guys are just walking up to people?
Walking up to people.
That's still what she does. She just walks up to people.
That is, and especially in New
Don't
York.
Don't walk up to, here.
Well, New York, people don't talk to each other, you know?
Right, which is why it was revolutionary when it started there. But even in St. Louis.
Yes, people will look at you, give you the side eye. You start talking to them, right?
Unless you're in Schnucks. When I first moved here, everybody it seemed in Schnucks wanted to talk to me, and I thought that was amazing. because nobody in any grocery store ever in New Jersey wanted to talk to me ever about anything.
Wow. Well, my husband always says, "You will talk to a rock." I said, "I will," because you get some great information.
If somebody like
from
Lindy
people.
comes up to you on the street, I could also see you giving them the side eye. So don't even pretend.
That's hilarious. And sometimes I get the side eye. Sometimes nobody wants to talk to me. They're like, "Who are you, strange lady who's asking these invasive questions about my sex life, how I feel about my skin color, where I come from, or what the hardest thing is I've had to overcome?"
Right. Do you have a mic with you?
No, I just use my phone and I ask for permission.
So that really looks like side eye type stuff, like some shady stuff. Oh, I'm going to talk to you through my phone, right?
Just listen.
Who is this?
Closer into the lapel, please. But clearly, folks actually do participate because you have a very robust catalog.
That's very cool, though.
Yeah, the fact that they're saying yes and they continue to say yes. I mean, it took Caroline and I a while to figure out how to open someone up and how to make them feel comfortable on the street, too, so that they want to share. Within 5 minutes, we have people who start crying. I feel kind of bad sometimes. And at the same time, I give them their space to share. And there's a lot of important
You may have been the first person who asked them to actually share.
And like most people want to talk to people or talk about themselves. They just don't know how to do it.
They also want to be known.
Yes.
Right? I mean, most of us, even though we may not want to be in the spotlight, don't want to be unknown.
Sometimes I've had people who have said, "Oh, I follow your site, but people know me. I'd rather not be on your site."
Yes.
And St. Louis is so small.
Yes.
But my favorite interviews are the ones where people say, "I don't know what you do. I don't know who you are, but let's talk." And then an hour later, you're learning so much about not just them, but their family, their past, how they're connected to everything here. And when they allow you that chance to ask anything and they meet you right there with their vulnerable answer, that just makes me
That's a lot of
so
trust.
excited.
And it's a lot of trust for people who don't know you. They trust that you're going to be able to present their information in a way that is true.
Like it's honorable to what they're saying.
Exactly.
Because I don't know if somebody approached me on the street, if I would share my bests and my worsts.
And your sex life and all of that. I don't think so about that, but...
It's funny because we're working on the publication right now, and my photo editor, she said, "We have stories about LGBTQIA. We have stories about gender identity. We need some stories about sex, Lindy."
Go out and get those.
Go out and get
from
those.
strangers.
I can tell you one you don't go up to is a tall, dark black man called
named
Alan Moore.
Moore.
Because he won't do it. That's my husband.
We'll also prep him that if he meets a petite young woman and her sidekick, that to not be offended. This is merely what they do for a living.
Yes.
That's amazing.
You've now presented us with a challenge that we may not be able to back away from.
Understood.
Very true.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break and come right back.
CET, the Center for Emerging Technologies, is a proud founding sponsor of the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. We want you to know about all the great resources they provide, including the Square One Ignite and Bootcamp programs, as well as the online startup toolkit. The toolkit has videos, articles, and other materials to help you build your business. For more information about CET's programs, visit CETSTL.com. And for your renewed and continued support, CET, we say thank you.
My name is Elaine Cha, and I'm the founding storyteller journalist for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri. Entrepreneurially thinking, to me, means being open to possibility that will create opportunities for myself as well as those in the communities where I live and work and play.
Continuing our conversation with Lindy and with Elaine. We started the show talking about empathy, right? But the ability to really ask an open-ended question, the idea that you could have your opinion about how something might be or how someone might feel or think, but be able to suspend that and actually probe and listen for that story. How does that manifest for you? How do you get good at that? Because that's one of the things we talk to entrepreneurs a lot about. And it's really hard for them to suspend their thinking about what problem they're solving and what solution is the best solution and who it's going to be good for and why it's going to be good for them, and just listen. So how do you do that? How do you just listen? How do you ask the right questions to listen?
Yeah, and there's no formula for it. I just know what works best for me when I go out on the street to do these interviews. In the beginning, we looked at Humans of New York's questions, like, what's your greatest struggle? And it was providing an example of how to approach people. I know that what's important for when I go out to do this project, the stories that I get in the time frame, they're not about me. So right away, I want to be able to connect with a stranger, ask them permission to make sure it's all systems go, and then dive right in with a question. And it's not a surface question, and it's not let's have a small talk kind of rapport to get real comfortable. I let them know right out of the gate, I'm going to ask you a pretty deep question.
And you said we kind of dive right in, which means you're not giving a lot of preamble, right? So you're not trying to impose on them what you're trying to get out of Humans of St. Louis, or how you're trying to position Humans of St. Louis. Because I could see an entrepreneur doing a big preamble, right? And then asking a question, which is, we advise against it, right? But there's a tendency, and what I'm hearing as part of your method is no preamble, sort of hello, permission, I'm going deep and I'm going fast.
Yeah, I'm really transparent about who I am and what I'm trying to do. And then it's straight into the interview. Once they say, yeah, that's fine, you can record, then I'll ask the questions. So the questions that we've designed as a team together have been open-ended. They've been from examples that we've used from other collaborative products, like working with Forward Through Ferguson, Ferguson Commission. But the ones that tend to get an answer right away are things like, what's your greatest fear? What are you most proud of? What is your greatest struggle? The ones that really interest me lately are questions that talk about where we come from and what we look like and what our skin color has meant to our lives here, especially here in this region. A lot of that's based off of the work that Elaine and I have done and that I want to continue doing in these interviews, because it's important. And when you see the commenters jump in because they have an opinion or a resource or some story they'd like to give too, that fascinates me. More than the likes, more than the audience reach, it's what conversation is happening as a result of what a single interaction that's happened on the street with someone I didn't even know I'd meet that day would produce. So a question like, when's the last time you've seen someone cross the racial divide? Something a little bit deeper to get someone to think, like, what's your experience been, right? What is an assumption people have about you that you wish that they didn't, but they do? And what do you do to defy a stereotype society has about you? And some of these things are really hard for people to answer. And it depends on the person, whether they're going to have an answer about that particular topic. So what I'm trying to do with these interviews too is to get people to jog a memory about a real life experience that only happened to them. I don't know what your life's been like, Christy, besides our interview that we had and watching your work here. And Cheryl, we just met today, right? Yeah. I know you from listening to one podcast that you've done.
But a really bad one. That was the first
one. But there's so much life experience you've had. And so I always go into it with that frame of mind. What's something I can gain from understanding someone's personal story and then share that with my audience so that they can, see it in their feed.
Right.
And instead of passing by real quick, they're getting a genuine piece of information to learn about other community members that they might not know about.
So, Elaine, how are you using the interface that you guys have in your work with the Big Brothers, Big Sisters?
So, Lindy and her team, they've been working on a book. So the work that I've done with her is not so much for Humans of St. Louis per se, because we've worked on projects for Forward Through Ferguson, and then we worked together around the commission work. I'm actually officially, as the storyteller journalist for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri, working with the Hostel book team. So what we do is different in that the stories that I am working on are very much built on, it's that trust that Lindy has, bar none. She's able to get people to open up to her. We are very different. I do that preamble thing. I think it's just because we are very different. Mm-hmm. And I think it's partly because in this job with Big Brothers Big Sisters and the one that I did before, and just to clarify, when I worked with Southern California Public Radio, I was not someone who did work for radio. I was a producer of in-person engagement programs. So it was live content.
What we would call beyond the screen or beyond the,
exactly.
the radio dial.
And
right?
It's now called like KPCC in person, where you get people together to talk about issues, concerns, interests. And it's not so much about starting a conversation. It's picking up a conversation that has been going on. Okay. And so that's kind of related, I think, to what Lindy has been talking about. And then what I do is come into a situation where I'm talking with people and trying to figure out where are they right now? What is the context of their story? And I think that's where the journalism part sort of comes in. And you know, engagement is it's a very sexy word. But really, it's just about like paying attention.
I was going to say, so it's very interesting. You're guiding conversation and you are just letting people have a conversation.
Elaine also does just let people have a conversation. Like working so much with her, interviewing individuals around the city, she has a knack for asking just the right question that will garner a ton of information about that individual. And then she's able to pull these moments that they're offering to connect it to the bigger picture.
So it's daylighting conversations that are already in progress in some ways, whether it's the internal conversation that nobody's asked me about or the external conversation in a community that's already underway. You're trying to daylight that rather than shape it per se.
Right. And there is some shaping involved. There is framing. Yeah. But the frame is not one where we're going into a conversation with, you know, a family or with a parent or with a little brother or little sister, right? And saying, this is what we want. So there are certain things that I, you know, like we did an interview with, and this is part of sort of the partnership that we are doing with Humans of St. Louis, is we talked with an alumni little sister, and she's a young mother. So it could be talked about in a lot of different ways. Yep. Teen mom, you know, unwanted pregnancy. But that is not, I don't think this is the way people live their lives. And the way that these narratives come out have a way of perpetuating.
Exactly.
So let's break that. Yeah. So in terms of the storytelling that we're doing together, how I'm contributing to the work around Humans of St. Louis and that book, and then what we're doing at Big Brothers Big Sisters really comes together in that it is illuminating those things. What are the issues, and how are people living their lives sort of in the everyday, and how does that show some of the stuff that we can probably work on together to create a better future for our region.
And that's what I was going to ask you. What's the impact that you're trying to attain, you know, by having the conversations, by having these stories? What's your idea for, you know, impact?
So one of the big things that took me a while to recognize is that we've created a platform for more people to talk in a place where it's really hard to do that on the streets. I mean, my job is talking to strangers, and sometimes I don't see people out on the streets if it's cold out, or if there's long stretches where it's just abandoned or it's considered unsafe. I'm still riding my bikes, weaving through the streets and going down back alleys and talking to people, picking out trash, looking for what they need. But maybe other people who are in their, you know, jobs during the day, they don't have that luxury. Right. Or they, quite frankly, would not do that.
We have built communities that are the antithesis of walking down a street and meeting a stranger, right? They're cul-de-sacs.
Exactly.
They're designed not to encourage that.
And there's the same route that people take every day to get from work, to pick up their children, to go shopping, to come home. And so how beautiful is it to
That's
be
what
able
I was
to
going to say. You don't see it because you're focused on, I got to go get the kid at 4, I got to go grocery shopping, but you miss all the beauty, I say, in between that. You miss the people, you miss, you know, you're passing by somebody and you don't even think, well, what's going on with this person, or what's in their life,
and if you do see it, like when you're at the corner of, the highway and Forest Park, whatever, and then there's a homeless person there, do you roll down your window to give them a piece of fruit or some money, or ask them, is everything okay? Do you get out of your car to stop to have that conversation? And that's what I'm doing. So when you take the time to listen and you hear those details, just like we heard in the story, Elaine and I, about this young mother and her big sister and her son, there's a lot more that adds up to why someone's life turns out the way that it does.
Exactly.
So the impact I'm looking for is to point out, what are those factors that got you to where you're at? And if you've already overcome something, or you're out of jail now, or you've gotten reparations for something that like you've done in your life, help me teach my audience what you did so that they can learn from you.
Well, I think you break stereotypes too, because telling a story, I don't know what the story is with the young woman, but most people think, oh, okay, here's a young teen, not married, having kids. A lot of people have been very successful in their lives, and they're not just a statistic. They've gone on to make great impact in different ways. That person that's a homeless person on the street, you don't know their story, right? You don't know if they did come from, a household and everything else. So I think what you guys are doing is really impactful, because you're breaking a lot of these stereotypes.
And the people who look like they all have it together don't necessarily have it together either.
I was going to say,
there's also there's the folks we would point to as having stories that are untold, and there are the folks that we point to say they probably don't have a story to tell, but who are we to know, right?
Exactly. Going to Starbucks, how many crazy people might you find there?
That's a whole nother conversation.
So to go back to what you were saying, Cheryl, what's the impact you want to make? For this particular project that we've decided to take on, like a snippet of all these stories to make a compilation, my team that I put together of creatives out here, we wrote this creative brief together for, what do we want out of this book? Do we just take random stories and like slap them on a page?
Right.
How beneficial is it to have one page of like, this is the domestic violence page? That's not really productive.
Right.
And it's different too to see one story on your feed, and then the next day you put a different story up there, and you can kind of include whatever. But in a book format, when you turn the page, or when you have one person and the next person left and right, page, it informs what's happening. And the reader, we wanted them to be following a narrative that's connected.
Right.
So we realized early on that these stories, they are just fun photography interviews, but there's a bit of qualitative research in this. This is like an ethnography of St. Louis in its own right. And so how neat would it be to ground it also in data that is evidence-based, or that is done through research? So that's part of the reason we invited Elaine on board too, to be somewhat of a dot connector, to make these connections, because I've witnessed her do that during our interviews and as we pulled these larger stories together in the other, collaborations that we've worked on.
Are you guys just doing these stories, or going to talk to people in certain areas of the city, or are you trying to get all different types of people in these stories? Now, from the folks that might be in North City to maybe the Central West End to, so you hear different stories, because everybody has a story.
I know. I go everywhere.
That's cool.
I go everywhere. It could be like after this interview, maybe if it was warm out, my bike's in my car, I'll take it out and just start rolling around this area. But there's no area that's off limits. We'll go to Illinois. We'll go to the east side. It makes it a little harder, I think, going to the county, because people tend to get in their car and go to where they have to go.
Stand inside of Schnucks or Dearborns. You talk to as many people as you want to. That's the takeaway
from today.
Right.
It makes it a little harder, but nothing's off limits, and then you have to realize too, like when I'm in Forest Park or somewhere local, that's for everybody, it brings people from other places. So I'm meeting people in places that I might not be able to go to, right? Sure. But nowhere's off limits.
So you've talked a lot about helping people express their narrative. And I would imagine in part of that, you're also, whether you're asking the question explicitly or not, you're asking about identity and sort of how you identify and how you move through the world. How do you identify? How do you move through the world? Because, we've used the words journalist and storyteller, you have the official degrees, right? I could call you a social worker and a public health advocate and all of those kinds of things. How do you self-identify? Because I'd also call you an entrepreneur, but I don't know if that's a word you'd use for yourself.
Yeah. I interviewed someone lately, and she had said that she's a multi-potentialite. I was like, I like that word. And I didn't really know what that meant. And it was hard to interview her because she had a lot of stuff that she had to bring into it.
She had lots of potentials.
Yeah.
A multi-potentialite.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
And you want to look at the stuff that I'm doing for Humans of St. Louis. There's so many hats that I wear to be like a Jill of all trades. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoy that. So I don't use the word ED for my position at Humans of St. Louis. I use the word.
You don't use executive director.
I don't. I use co-founder and lead storyteller because that's technically what I'm doing. And I feel comfortable with that. And that's okay for me. It took a while to put myself in an entrepreneurial umbrella because I was just doing what I was doing for fun.
Right.
I wanted to photograph. I wanted to hear people's stories and to have permission to share them. Once we decided to incorporate and to make it a nonprofit, then it took on a different level.
But you're still doing something that you love and you have passion around. That's what we always tell entrepreneurs.
And you're both making a living storytelling, correct?
Absolutely.
100%.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
And St. Louis allows us to do that. I wouldn't have known that before I came here. Being connected with other storytellers like Elaine and diving in and seeing the response from our viewership, that fills my heart. And so when we had that first call from the Ferguson Commission and then Forward the Ferguson and then United Way and then St. Louis Community Foundation is like, how do you do what you do to hostel in this realm?
Hostel being
Humans of St. Louis.
So the lingo is clear.
Yes.
And it worked.
Yeah.
You want to just talk about what people's visions are for a racially equitable St. Louis, a generation away from Mike Brown. We can ask people that question. Everyone will have a different answer. And there might be a lot of overlap. But that's wonderful information to share with everybody because who is asking these questions? And do you ask them at your dinner table or with your friends? Or with a stranger, which could be the most awkward, some people think. And for me, that's the most comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Very cool. And it's interesting that the nonprofits have tapped into you guys to help them shape and tell stories. Corporates might
I'm
need
just
to
saying
do that
there's
too.
a whole, but also being able to look at the thing you love, the thing you're good at, the thing that brings you great joy and also has added so richly to the lives of the people you've interviewed. And you're able to make a living at it. I mean, I think that's
most important.
Most importantly.
That's a really important thing to reflect on because I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs who might self-identify as creatives or artists or an other nomenclature who either assume they can't make a living at their art or that they'll make art and they'll make a living and those may live in different spheres, right? And so I like to explore just what it means to be a working artist. And in that way, it's about monetizing your art and doing so in a way, at least for you both, that is also feeding the mission of your respective organizations. Those aren't mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
Being able to live and produce your art and make money at it and fulfill a broader social mission are not mutually exclusive.
Exactly. And there was a time where I was that photographer on Craigslist back in Arizona saying, can someone hire me for a wedding?
Right.
I'd be glad to do your wedding.
Which is great. That's
Which
somebody
is
else's
great.
business model.
Exactly. But for what I wanted to do, it took coming to school here and getting those degrees, sitting in classes, hearing the conversations that were happening, then going out on the street in tandem and saying, oh, this stuff is real life. It's not just in this bubble, in this academic world. Let's hear what people have to say about it. So when I don't choose a conversation, I'm asking something like, what's been the hardest thing you've had to overcome lately? And there's an African-American young woman who says, I can't hold my blessings. What does that mean? And they talk about, I've had multiple miscarriages. And we just studied that in like the high tower of Wash U. And it's like, there's a connection there. Who's that person that's affecting? How do you tell that story? That fascinates me.
Awesome.
The one thing I think also is that the importance of community and people who are supporting one another. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it were not for that. And the overlap that has happened. So I met a parent and she has more than one child in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. She's somebody we interviewed together for the Ferguson Commission content. That's not a connection I was looking for. It was a connection that was there because in some way our efforts are connected one to another. So
we're not as separate and
No,
isolated
we
as we
aren't.
perceive ourselves to be.
Right. And then I think in terms of entrepreneurship and sort of recognizing how do you feed your soul and your spirit, but also feed your family? These sort of concerns are ones that I've thought about a little bit more since having a child. And I've had people ask me whether I've thought about going out on my own to do what I do. And that's not the right thing for me at this point. But someone else is recognizing it also is empowering.
Right.
And it was somebody who was in
That
the
there's
journalism
value.
space.
And that value there is a market for that value, right? Which is a whole nother conversation, which I look forward to having you back for.
Yes.
But because we have come to the end of our time together, I want to make sure that our listeners know where to find your good work and follow the things that you're doing. So, Lindy, where do we find Humans of St. Louis?
Great. Well, you can find it on Facebook and you can find it on Instagram, Twitter as well. And then for the book project that we're still making, you can pre-order a copy at humansofstl.org.
Wonderful. Because you did a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe campaign, something around that, right? You did.
Last year we did a Kickstarter in July, and luckily it was successful. We're very happy about that.
Good.
That afforded us a quarter of our budget to be able to self-publish. So we're deciding not to go through a publication agency. We're making it ourselves, all from local creatives here, from the designers to the photo editors and everything.
Very cool.
Putting
Wonderful.
people to work.
Awesome. And Elaine, if I want to keep tabs on your storytelling and journalism for Big Brothers Big Sisters, where do I find you?
You can come to bbbsemo.org, and there's a stories tab. And we're also very active on social media, so you can find us with the same letters at bbbsemo on Instagram as well as on Twitter. And we have a Facebook page. So the storytelling that I get to do, some of that content ends up on social media too.
Wonderful. Great.
Yes.
Well, thank you both for being with us. It's been great.
This has been wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Changing the way you view new ventures, unlocking your creativity and innovation, igniting your thinking about entrepreneurship. It's Entrepreneurially Thinking. Get connected and discover more. Visit entrepreneuriallythinking.com to listen to all your favorite episodes and learn more about our guests, hosts, and sponsors. Feeling inspired? Be sure to share your thoughts, questions, and stories in the comments section. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. The best way to show love is to share and subscribe. Let everybody know that you're entrepreneurially thinking.